Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Robert M. Bowman.
We're in a situation in this country where a lot of folks don't want to admit that they're liberal or they're conservative or both, because both have been sort of given a bad name, particularly by the major media. People on the far left and the far right of the political spectrum have been alienated and marginalized and ridiculed. But from my run for the presidency in year 2000, I covered the country and I talked to a lot of different folks, and I learned that there's a great commonality between folks on the far left and the far right. And since then, I have exploited that and have been trying to bring folks together in our common interest, because many of my talks have been co-sponsored by the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, for example, and the Kucinich folks and the Ron Paul folks. And this, I think, is our hope for the future, because if we stay splintered, we're not going to succeed in taking our country back. We've been artificially divided for far too long between left and right, conservative and liberal, Democrat and Republican. We've been divided by the power elite who want to keep us apart, keep us fighting between ourselves so we don't come together and resist them. And so they have taken control of both major political parties in this country. And to give we the people the illusion that we have a choice, that this is some kind of democracy, they split up the Democrats and the Republicans and say, well, now you guys be for abortion and you be against it, you be for school prayer, you be against it, you be for gay rights, you be against it, you be for gun control, you be against it. And, you know, the things that those issues have in common, besides the fact that the federal government probably has no business mucking around with them in the first place, is that the billionaires who run things could care less how it turns out. Those issues do not affect their bottom line. And they're very happy to have the Democrats and the Republicans appear very, very different, so we think we've got a choice. But on issues that matter to them and their bottom line, they make sure that the two parties are as one. When it comes to going to war, to secure an oil or gas pipeline, or signing a trade deal to drive down wages and drive up their profits, there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. Remember, it was Bill Clinton and his administration who gave us NAFTA, which destroyed the standard of living on both sides of the Rio Grande. And it was Al Gore, the hero of the environmental movement, who was the hatchet man for the Clinton administration, cramming NAFTA down the throats of a reluctant Congress. This is not a party issue. And there are a lot of Democrats who are not here tonight because they figure, well, now we've got Obama in, the problems are all solved, everything's going to be fine. And there are a lot of Republicans who are not here tonight who say, oh, well, we've got to live through this, but George W. Bush never did anything wrong, and we're better off now than we've ever been. And of course, I believe they're all wrong. We have severe problems in this country, and they were not solved by electing Barack Obama. He may be part of the solution, but that's up to us, really. He can't do it by himself, even if he wants to. I've been in this truth-telling business full-time now for 27 years. And it's been a quarter of a century since I've had a paycheck. I'm a 100% disabled combat veteran, and I get my money from Uncle Sam, fortunately, and we're okay. But this is something that drives us. I mean, when I was a high-priced executive in the industry, I couldn't tell my wife what I was doing any more than I could when I was running black programs in the Air Force. And then we came together in 1982. I had to resign from industry in order to fight Reagan's Star Wars scheme and the proposals of the lunatics who controlled him, who wanted an aggressive war against the Soviet Union, a nuclear first strike. And ever since, I mean, we've been a lot poorer, but much happier. And the business of being a full-time troublemaker and whistleblower and truth teller is something I would recommend to anybody. It's a lot of fun. The Patriots, the organization I founded 27 years ago, as John told you, we stand for demanding a government that follows the Constitution, honors the truth, and serves the people. And all of us are interested in having a government that serves us. But you can't have that unless you have the first two. Government that runs roughshod over the Constitution and wind up with a unitary executive, as Dick Cheney calls it, otherwise known as the imperial presidency, is not going to serve the people. Similarly, a government like we have had with both parties for the last umpteen years, decades and decades, a government that hides the truth, covers up the truth, and tells big lies, creates government myths that support their policies, which, instead of serving the people, serve only the global robber barons, the multinational corporations and banks. And we've seen that time and time again. We need to do something about it. The worst of these policies, I think, have been the wars. Since World War II, Congress has never declared war once. And yet, we have bombed, invaded, and otherwise gone to war against dozens of countries. China, Guatemala, Haiti, China again, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Nicaragua, Guatemala again, Nicaragua again, Panama, and of course Afghanistan, Iraq a couple of times, and Bosnia. The bottom line is all of these undeclared, illegal, unconstitutional wars have also been wars which have not served the interest of the American people, have only served the financial interests of the global investors. They have not promoted our national security. As a matter of fact, they've detracted from it. They've caused the deaths of tens of thousands of young American soldiers, millions of innocent civilians around the world, destroyed our reputation as a moral leader in the world, and brought us to the brink of financial collapse. They have also managed to drive down wages in this country to where now wages are a third of what they were in the 1950s when I entered the workforce. A third. Most American workers don't realize that. They don't know why their family has to have 2 wage earners and 3 jobs between them just to get by. When back in the 1950s, 1 wage earner per family, 1 job, 40 hours a week. No big deal. True wages, adjusted for inflation, are a third of what they were then. But it's the wars and the deaths which to me are the greatest evil that's been brought on by corporate control of the government. Now, what do you call corporate control of the government? Well, Benito Mussolini called it fascism, and he should know. And there are many constraints that should have prevented our government from getting involved in those wars. One's the Constitution itself. The Constitution doesn't allow this stuff to happen. It happens anyway. Another is international law. All of these wars are illegal under international law. We do them anyway. The UN Charter, which allows war only in self-defense. How many of those wars have been in self-defense? 0. None. How many of the countries that we bombed or invaded had attacked the United States? None. How many were even a threat to attack the United States? None. And how many of those conflicts benefited the American people? None. In addition, this country, which is the majority of us in this country are Christians. We don't have a Christian government, but the majority of us in this country are Christians. And yet Christian theology doesn't allow these wars either. There's only 2 positions in Christian theology, 2 schools of thought. One is the nonviolence of Jesus, and the other is the just war school of thought, dreamed up after Constantine, when St. Augustine created these justifications for going to war, and they were refined by Thomas Aquinas. There are 8 criteria in the just war principles. And the idea was, if a conflict satisfied all 8 of these criteria, then it was permissible for Christians to be involved. Otherwise, it was not. Because in general, the general rule is war is immoral and Christians may not participate in it. Now, the church, after the first 300 or so years of being total nonviolence, changed over to the just war principles so that Christians could go fight in Caesar's army. And for the last 1700 years, almost all of the churches have been going along with that. They've been following Caesar instead of Jesus. And as a matter of fact, Jesus is almost totally missing from most of Christianity. Most of the churches worship an ethereal, risen Christ, totally ignore the flesh and blood Jesus of Nazareth, who taught and practiced nonviolence. The early Christians followed Jesus. I'm afraid most of us now are following Caesar. And you know, if our churches taught their people what their theology says they believe, if our Christian churches were true to what they say on paper, we could end these wars. Because Christians, realizing that participation in an unjust war is immoral and sinful, would say, no, I'm not going. And without Christians, how many wars could our government fight? Very doggone few. And so one of the things I'm doing when I get for church groups, I have a whole talk which is just on that, is calling on churches to start teaching what on paper they believe. And yeah, you may offend a few rich folks in the audience and the contributions may go down, but you know, when you sign up to be a minister of God, you know, there's an obligation that comes with it. And my message to them, and I'll quit with talking about religion with this, my message to them is, if you can't honestly tell your people the truth about morality and war, then put down your Bible, take off your collar, and get an honest job. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this is not a partisan issue, and as much as I fought against the Cheney-Bush administration, we don't have them to kick around anymore, and we have a new president, and instead of having sort of a bumbling ignoramus who's the embarrassment of the world and could hardly speak a sentence and get it to come out straight, we have a very eloquent, intelligent, charismatic president. And if he follows the dictates of the same global elites that his predecessor did, that makes him even more dangerous. The difference is going to be us. I like to think back to when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected, and the Union folks went to FDR and they explained what they had been through. Their workers beaten and killed on the picket lines, wages in the toilet. They needed help. The unions were in sad shape. And Roosevelt said, I agree with you. I know what you need. I know what you want. I agree with you. Now you go out there and make me do it. Because Roosevelt understood that the Constitution of the United States doesn't give him the power to make real change by himself. He needs a real popular groundswell from the people in order to pull it off. And the same thing is true of Obama. His bosses in the global elite dictate policy. His immediate mentor is Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was Jimmy Carter's mentor and boss in the Trilateral Commission. With Bill Clinton, it was David Gergen. Every president of both parties ever since John F. Kennedy has a mentor in the Trilateral Commission, has been a member of the Trilateral Commission and handpicked for the nomination of his party. There has not been a nominee for president of either major party who wasn't a member of the club and handpicked to carry things out. But once in a while you get one that after he's elected, he goes against him. Jimmy Carter tried to do that. But Brzezinski essentially took power away from him. Jimmy Carter was not strong enough to pull it off successfully. And so he was sort of relegated to walking in the rose garden while Brzezinski ran the government. Well, we're in a similar situation now with Obama. Obama also, like Jimmy Carter, is very intelligent. And I think he's going to come to realize that the policies he's being told to put forward are not in the people's interest. But he can't do anything about it unless there is a massive popular groundswell demanding that he do the right thing by the people of this country, demanding that he follow the Constitution, honor the truth, and serve the people. And so I would like to conclude by reading excerpts from the inaugural address that I wrote for President Obama and sent to him last December. Now, he didn't use it, but we have to keep pushing. This, for those of you who heard my inaugural address last year, there's a little overlap here because some things haven't changed. Although I've cut out my most radical positions and tailored this to be something that Obama could say. And it is my vision of the future, positive vision, and it's something that I think we the people ought to take these issues one by one or all together, or however you want to do it, and make noise about it. Because unless we demand that he do some of the things that I had him do in this speech, we're in sad shape and we're in for a continuation of fascism. So let me conclude by giving you a few excerpts from this inaugural address, which didn't happen. My fellow Americans, our many problems are not due to incompetence or inexperience or a government that's too big or too small, but because those in government have not been serving us. They have served their corporate masters and benefactors and have deliberately chosen policies which harm our nation and our people. Those of us who dedicate our lives to peace, economic justice, and environmental preservation can make little progress in our struggles so long as ultimate power is in the hands of those who profit from war, poverty, and pollution. But here comes the good news. Today, that power has come to an end. As long as I am President of the United States, this government will serve the needs of the people, not the greeds of the wealthy elite. Now, turning things around won't be easy. What our Constitution allows me to change, I shall, and I'll do it fast. But for much of what needs doing, I'll need the cooperation of you in Congress. This Constitution does not make me the decider. only the proposer and the implementer. You, the people's representatives in Congress, are the deciders. I am therefore vacating all the over 1,100 signing statements imposed by my predecessor. I'm revoking Presidential Directives 20 and 51, which give me dictatorial powers. I ask for repeal of the misnamed Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, and all the martial law and special and dictatorial powers acts passed in the last 8 years. They are unconstitutional anyway. You in Congress out there do not have the legal right to take away the rights of our citizens under this Constitution and the Bill of Rights. To do that, you'd have to pass a constitutional amendment and get it ratified by the states. That hasn't happened, and that won't happen. And you know it. So enough of these unconstitutional laws pretending to take away the rights that this document guarantees us. Repeal those things. We, the people, must once again throw off the shackles of tyranny and take back our country and our Constitution. Now, restoring the Constitution means ending the imperial presidency and returning power to the people's representatives. But I warn you, members of Congress, if you continue to violate your constitutional responsibility to serve your constituents and instead serve only yourselves and the big money interests you are indebted to, I will go over your heads to the American people and ask them to retire all of you, regardless of party. In order to restore some semblance of our republic, we must give the people real choices, not false ones. In all too many elections, we've had a choice between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And in some cases, between Tweedledum and Tweedledummer. And we must also have an informed electorate, not a brainwashed electorate. What this means is we need electoral reform and media reform. First, electoral reform. The constitutional principle of one person, one vote means that any means of voting which does not produce a paper ballot that can be counted, recounted, and audited as necessary is unconstitutional. I ask Congress and the states to return to paper ballots and institute full public financing of elections, proportional representation, preference voting, sometimes called instant runoff voting, abolition of burdensome petition requirements on independents and third parties, and so working people can actually vote, making Election Day a federal holiday. Now, many of these electoral reforms are designed to empower third parties because there is nothing democratic about a two-party system when both parties are owned at the highest level by the same powerful interests. I also ask Congress to quickly pass a constitutional amendment restoring the original meaning of this document. The amendment says, corporations and other fictitious entities are not persons under this Constitution and shall have none of the rights and privileges thereof. So much for corporate free speech rights to spend as much money as they want buying up politicians and buying up votes. And now, media reform. I am ordering the Federal Communications Commission to immediately reinstate the ban on ownership of multiple media outlets. It's time for a return to family-owned newspapers and radio and television stations. The monopoly media conglomerates must sell off their assets immediately. Sorry, Mr. Murdoch. You see, the key to ending fascism is to separate big money and political power. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, I've asked the Justice Department to indict members of the previous administration, including the former president and vice president, as war criminals. They exploited the 9/11 tragedy to deceive this nation into unnecessary and illegal wars of aggression against Afghanistan and Iraq. They abused their power, violated the Constitution and their oath of office. The evidence of their guilt is absolutely overwhelming. Now, when I was sworn in, and I assume when they were too, I promised to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that includes a renegade president and vice president. If I or any member of my administration ever gives illegal orders such as we have seen lately, I expect the military to refuse to carry them out and to take action against us. You in the military understand that your duty to the Constitution far exceeds any perceived loyalty to any person. The real question is why you members of Congress out there failed to perform your constitutional duty by impeaching these criminals long ago. The official 9/11 report, tightly controlled by the Bush White House, amounts to little but a whitewash. When combined with the confiscation of videotapes, audio tapes, black boxes, and other evidence by the FBI, it's clear that regardless of who was responsible for 9/11, the subsequent cover-up was itself a conspiracy involving elements of the White House and the intelligence establishment. This raises the question, if the Bush administration had nothing to hide, why did they hide everything? Were they covering up guilt or incompetence? If it was incompetence, why was no one demoted or fired or court-martialed or even reprimanded? And if they were protecting guilty parties, are they Saudis, Israelis, Pakistanis, Americans, all of the above? And why on earth aren't the people's representatives in Congress asking these questions and demanding answers? The American people have still not been told who was really responsible for 9/11. Dedicated researchers have proven that it could not have happened the way the Bush administration said it did. Hijacked airliners do not fly around for an hour and 40 minutes without being intercepted, unless our air defense system was deliberately sabotaged. Indestructible black boxes, and they're not really black, they're bright orange, but never mind. Indestructible black boxes do not evaporate in the same fire from which an unharmed passport floats to the street below. Steel skyscrapers do not implode and collapse at freefall speed because of a kerosene fire. Steel skyscrapers do not collapse at all because of a kerosene fire. Never have and never will. And of course, Building 7 wasn't even struck by an airplane. The truth about 9/11 is that after 8 years, we still don't know the truth about 9/11, and we should, and so should the families of victims. Oh, we're knowing more about it all the time. We know that in the dust from the World Trade Center buildings there was nanothermite, a military used in controlled demolitions. But we don't know who did it, and we need to. I am therefore appointing a commission to conduct a new and truly independent investigation of 9/11. It will be co-chaired by David Ray Griffin and Richard Gage. Never again must we allow this nation to be stampeded into war under false pretenses. Now, many, many evils came about because of the cover-up of 9/11 and the government myth surrounding it. But that's not the only truth we're interested in. There have been many other cover-ups, and we're going to explode those as well. I want to just mention one other one. The murders of a number of our soldiers in the field, most of them women. If the Pentagon won't do a proper investigation, we'll do it for them. Parents have a right to know what really happened to soldiers like Pat Tillman and Lavina Johnson.
Yes.
Now, most people out there have heard of Pat Tillman, war hero turned football star turned war hero turned conscientious objector, who was supposedly killed accidentally by friendly fire. What they don't tell you is that all but one of the shots that hit Pat Tillman were fired from closer than 10 feet. Appears that he was deliberately fragged because he had turned against the war, and they couldn't afford for a famous person to do that. But there are a lot of less famous folks who have suffered a similar fate. Few people know about Lavina Johnson, and there are many like her. Lavina was a lovely young African-American girl, 18 years old, a Christian, a virgin, who volunteered to serve in Iraq. Her body was discovered in a Halliburton tent, and it was shipped home in a closed coffin. Her parents told not to open it. But her father is a physician, and Dr. Johnson opened that casket and examined his daughter. Her brains had been blown out. There were bruises all over her body. Her hands were burned badly, so badly that they couldn't have held a gun, for example. And acid had been poured on her genitals in an apparent attempt to destroy DNA evidence. The Army has ruled it a suicide. My brothers and sisters, a government that honors the truth must uncover the truth and then tell the truth. And that's what we're going to do. Now, we have at times, including, I think, the last few years, had a government with bad policies. But we're a good people. What we have long needed is a government that reflects the values and goodness of the American people. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which cooperates with big business to export our jobs and import cheap illegal labor, driving down wages for all American workers. We're taking steps to benefit workers. I asked the Congress to pass legislation indexing the minimum wage for inflation, placing tariffs on importation of goods manufactured by corporations who send jobs out of this country, and limiting the corporate income tax deduction for executive compensation to 20 times the salary of their lowest paid worker, legal or illegal. You know, the ratio between CEO pay and worker pay used to be 20 to 1. Now it's over 600 to 1. Well, this is a free country. Corporations can pay their executives whatever they want. But we don't have to give them a tax deduction for it.
Yay.
Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which violates international law in its conflicts and denies its own citizens their constitutional rights. I have therefore ordered the release of all those being detained without charge, the closure of the prison at Guantanamo Bay. We'll find somewhere else for Bush and Cheney. And the end of the rendition program in which suspects are kidnapped and taken to secret foreign prisons to be tortured. I've pardoned a host of political prisoners, including Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and a long list. I'm also pardoning all those incarcerated for possession or use of marijuana. Yay. The failed war on drugs is over. All contracts for mercenaries, and by the way, did you know that this Constitution prohibits the use of mercenaries by our government? All contracts for mercenaries, including all contracts with Blackwater, or Z as they call themselves now, are canceled. This includes contracts with the DOD, the CIA, the State Department, and the Department of Homeland Security, which, by the way, is being abolished. We don't need an organization whose only duty seems to be to prosecute a police state, round up and incarcerate our citizens. No more Homeland Security. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which promotes a globalization which depresses living standards at home and allows corporations to destroy the quality of life in banana republics and client states all around the world. The WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank have caused untold suffering. If we can't reform them, we will abolish them. Now, with respect to our relationship with the government of Mexico, I have ordered the cancellation of the Security and Prosperity Partnership, or North American Union. Abandonment for plans for a NAFTA superhighway, which would have cut the country in half and put nearly all American longshoremen and truckers out of work. And suspension of NAFTA completely until Mexico gives its workers union rights, protections for safety, health, and the environment, and wages at least matching the U.S. federal minimum wage. No more free trade. There must be fair trade. From now on, globalization will mean raising living standards in developing nations to match ours, not the other way around. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a system in which all our personal income taxes go to pay interest on a staggering national debt created out of thin air. The Constitution authorizes Congress to coin our money, not a private cartel. I ask Congress to eliminate the debt-based monetary system and to pass legislation abolishing the Federal Reserve. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which launches unnecessary wars of aggression. I have asked the United Nations to send peacekeepers to Iraq and Afghanistan to do a job we simply can't do as an occupying army. You can't win an occupation. Whether or not they comply, within 3 months, we are going to support what's left of our troops by bringing them home while they're still alive. I've also ordered a permanent halt to the use of depleted uranium weapons. They will be destroyed and stored as the dangerous radioactive waste they really are. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which uses our money to train death squads in the techniques of torture, intimidation, and assassination. The School of the Americas, by whatever name they choose to call it, is closed. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which gives most favored nation status to the butchers of Tiananmen Square and places an illegal secondary embargo on the impoverished people of Cuba. The embargo of Cuba just ended. Our values and goodness are not reflected by forcing family farmers off the land and destroying their livelihood. If you in Congress send me the National Animal Identification System or these so-called food safety bills, which will do just that and have loopholes exempting Monsanto and Archer Daniels, Midland and Tyson Foods and all the other biggies, I will veto them. I recognize that we need advance information on the activities of Al-Qaeda and those who wish to do us harm. But our values and goodness are not reflected by, and our security is not enhanced by, an organization that promotes instability, insurrection, tyranny, torture, terrorism, murder, and war around the world in our name and with our money. John F. Kennedy and Jimmy Carter tried to reform the CIA so it would stick to gathering intelligence. They failed. I'm not going to try. As of this moment, I am abolishing the CIA. There are a lot of good analysts in the CIA. They were right about Iraq. Our government was wrong. They were right about Iran. Our government was wrong. And those good analysts will be given other jobs in the defense intelligence agencies under the direction of my new intelligence czar, Ray McGovern. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which sends its working class youth around the world to kill the sons and daughters of working people in other countries. Our values and goodness are not reflecting by sending our children to the Middle East to kill Arabs so the oil companies can profit from selling the oil under other people's sand, making us the target of terrorists. No more Iraqs, no more Kosovos, no more El Salvadors. These are not isolated incidents of stupidity. They're part of a long, bloody history of foreign policy being conducted for the financial benefit of the wealthy few. It's a new form of colonialism. It violates our Constitution. It endangers our national security. It mortgages our future. It sacrifices our children, and it will never happen again. I am returning us permanently to a constitutional foreign and military policy. As president, I will use the men and women of our armed forces to protect our borders and our people. Period. Yes. Not the financial interests of Bechtel, Folgers, Chiquita Banana, Exxon, and Halliburton. This one change in military mission, eliminating the mission of protecting the global financial interests of multinational corporations, will allow us to greatly enhance our national security and at the same time reduce the defense budget by 80%. Now there is a step toward fiscal responsibility. I have ordered the Secretary of Defense to begin an immediate recall of our forces all around the world. Think of it. After 64 years, the occupation of Germany and Japan is finally coming to an end. With the exception of small Marine detachments guarding our embassies, all our military will be home within 3 months, and all overseas bases will be returned to the host countries. Needless to say, there will be no nuclear attack on Iran. My special envoy to the Middle East, Jimmy Carter, will be meeting with them to solve our differences. And once he has finished there, he will straighten out the Israelis and the Palestinians. Our values and goodness are not reflected by a government which for decades has been in violation of its treaty responsibilities to disarmament. I've ordered a halt to the design, testing, and production of nuclear weapons, and have directed the Secretary of State to open negotiations toward the rapid and total abolition of nuclear weapons. I'm unlikely to get there with you. But I have been to the mountaintop like Brother Martin, and I have seen the promised land. What I have seen is an America in which every person, regardless of their race, creed, color, age, or sexual orientation, is valued and lives in dignity. Every person is cared for. Every person is free to reach his or her full potential. It's an America in which every family can be supported by one wage earner with one job paying a living wage. It's an America in which health care is provided to all as a right through a single-payer national health program. As a conservative, I believe that the only fiscally responsible way to provide health care is to eliminate the profit, the overhead, the red tape, and the interference between doctor and patient of the insurance companies by kicking them out of health care altogether. I see an America in which educators and teachers are highly valued and financially compensated accordingly. It's an America in which policemen, nurses, firefighters, poets, teachers, and garbage collectors can afford a good house in a nice neighborhood and live in comfort. Not just scientists, brain surgeons, CEOs, rock stars, lawyers, and basketball players. It's an America in which faith is respected, culture is preserved, the arts are supported, and the Constitution is actually followed. It's an America that seeks not to be king of the hill, nor subservient to the World Trade Organization, but seeks to be a responsible, sovereign member of the family of nations. Nothing more and nothing less. It's an America that is free of the threat of terrorism because it is no longer feared and hated. Because it no longer does hateful things to people all around the world. An America that leads the world, not just with military might, but with its vision, its compassion, its democracy, its productivity, its freedom, its standard of living, its care for the global environment, its treatment of its own people, and its goodness. Above all, it's an America at peace with the world and with its own people. That's the America I have seen, the America our people deserve, and the America we can build. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.